All right, good morning, Woodhaven. It is so good to be with you today as we kind of kick off Summers on the Lawn, the inside version. But I gotta be honest, I'm a little disappointed we're not outside in the sunshine. But I'm also really grateful that we get to be inside and warm and comfortable. And Jordan, thanks for making the transition. I know there's a lot of work that goes into that. So thank you, Jordan, for helping us be inside today. But this morning, I kind of have the joy of closing out our series, Love God, Love Others. And it's been such a meaningful journey for me over the last few weeks. And honestly, I'm kind of just hoping that I don't blow the save in the bottom of the ninth. John has kind of been throwing strikes the last few weeks, and I just don't want to walk the bases loaded today. But over the past few weeks, we've been diving into this remarkable conversation between Jesus and a religious lawyer who had a big, honest question. He asks, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" Or in everyday terms, how do I live the kind of life that I was made for? The kind that goes beyond just surviving the day. It looks like joy, purpose, and connection. Because following Jesus isn't just about getting into heaven someday. It's about making the reality of God's kingdom come alive here and now, in the way that we relate to God, in the way that we see ourselves, in the way that we love our neighbors. But like Jesus, as he often does, he doesn't just answer the guy's question. Rather, he asks him another question. He says, "Well, what do you say?" And the lawyer replies with the greatest commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, and your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus says, "You have answered correctly. Do this, and you will live." Now, John, over the last few weeks, helped us kind of explore what it really means to love God and love ourselves so that we can love others from a rooted place. But then the lawyer kind of tries to draw the circle a little smaller. And he asks, well, who exactly is my neighbor? Like, how far do I truly have to go with this commandment? And instead of telling him exactly who his neighbor is or giving him a checklist, Jesus goes on to tell a story. And not just any story, but one of the most famous, well-known, and radically loving parables of all time. The parable of the Good Samaritan. And this isn't just a story that's meant to inspire us, but a parable that was meant to shape us. And so if you've never heard it before or you're coming to church for one of the first times, here's kind of the short version. Jesus tells of a man who was traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. And this was a notoriously dangerous road. And this man gets jumped, he gets robbed, he gets beaten, and he's left half dead on the side of the road. First, a priest walks by, someone who's supposed to represent who God is in the world. And he sees the man and he just keeps walking. Next, a Levite walks by, someone who takes care of the temple, assists in priestly duties. He sees the man and he just keeps walking as well. But then a Samaritan shows up. Now, in that culture, Samaritans and Jews were enemies. They didn't really talk much. They didn't really associate. They had centuries of bad blood. So everyone kind of thought that the Samaritan would just avoid the situation. But the Samaritan doesn't. He stops. He sees the man, he bandages the wounds, he puts the man on his own donkey, he takes him to an inn, he pays the bill, and tells the innkeeper, "If it costs more, I'll come back and cover it." And then Jesus ends the story by asking another question. Which of these three was a neighbor? The lawyer answers, the one who showed mercy. And Jesus says, "Go and do likewise." Now, this parable isn't really about geography or where our neighbors are located or even who our neighbors are. It's about embracing an identity. It's about becoming the kind of people who live as a neighbor wherever we are, whatever situation we find ourselves in. Because Jesus isn't just telling us to be nice, he's actually inviting us to become neighbors, to embody a different kind of kingdom. One where mercy overrides prejudice, where compassion trumps convenience, where kindness overrules comfort. Again, this parable isn't just a good moral tale. It's a picture of what a Christ follower looks like, of how God's kingdom operates differently than the rest of the world. Because for Jesus, love always moves. Love always acts. And our actions tell a story of who we believe our God to be. The parable of the Good Samaritan is a radical invitation not to just know the right answers like the lawyer, but to truly embody mercy in our everyday lives, to become neighbors, to see people, to stop, to risk, to love. It challenges every attempt that we make to kind of try to draw lines around who's in and who's out, who's worthy of our time, our care, and compassion. Because it's everybody, everywhere, always. And that's what this whole series has kind of been building toward. Because you can't love others well if you don't first know the love of God. And you can't receive that love fully if you constantly beat yourselves up and believe you're unworthy. It starts with receiving the love of God, letting that change how you view yourselves, and then letting that love overflow in how we show up for our neighbors. And I think one of the reasons why the parable of the Good Samaritan still resonates so deeply thousands of years later is because we can see ourselves in every single character, whether we like it or not. Right? At times we've been the priest and the Levite who are busy, overwhelmed, maybe afraid of crossing the road and entering into somebody's mess because it's uncomfortable or it's scary. We've been the man on the side of the road, broken, bleeding, wondering if anyone truly sees us or understands what we're facing, hoping that someone will stop. And we've been the robbers at times, causing hurt in moments of selfishness or pride or participating in systems that harm others without even really realizing it. And by God's grace, at times we have been the Samaritan in our own lives, or have had a Samaritan show up for us. I remember this one time growing up in Boy Scouts, we were on a field trip to a police station. You remember the kind where they show you the fingerprint room, they take your fingerprints, they give you kind of a tour, and then they talk about what it means to be a good citizen and how to be safe. I had no idea what badge we were supposed to be earning. You'll kind of understand why later on in the story. But my mom had to be one of the drivers that day, and she had to bring along my 4-year-old brother. I was 8 at the time, and so I wanted to look cool in front of all of my friends. And somewhere between the fingerprinting and the ride home, my brother got really annoying, and he started embarrassing me in front of everybody. And so naturally, as brothers do, things kind of escalated into this mini backseat fight as we got into the car. And of course, as the older sibling, I was the one who got in trouble. My mom gave me that classic mom look that you never want to see ever because you know you're about to be in big trouble. And she told me to knock it off. Now, my response is not something I'm proud of. It was not one of my finest moments. And so as we were pulling out of the police station parking lot, yes, the police station, I turned over to my friends and I said, "Watch this." And I quietly opened the car door and I gently gave my brother a little shove. Yeah, I gently shoved him out of the moving vehicle in the police station parking lot. Now, before you panic, we were hardly moving at the time. It was just outside the station, and thankfully he was okay. Now, my mom doesn't dispute the fact that he got pushed out of the car, but she does dispute the fact that she didn't notice. However, me and my little brother remember the story completely differently, and we remember her continuing to drive as he bounced along the police station parking lot on his butt. Now, thankfully, there was someone that was biking by and noticed all of this, and thankfully for me, it wasn't the police officer who saw it, it was just a biker. But a biker noticed what happened, and he quickly caught up to my mom at the stop sign before she left the parking lot, knocked on the window, and calmly explained what happened. Now, my brother, again, was fine, except he still does bear a scar where his butt hit the pavement. I, on the other hand, was not so fine. My mom did not react in a very pleasant manner. My Boy Scout career ended very abruptly that day, and I did not see the outside of my room for a very, very, very long time. And I know you're probably thinking to yourselves, how did we hire this guy as a pastor? He pushed his brother out of a car, he hid Bibles in the ceiling, he got caught pretending to be a dog by his neighbors with a collar on. Like, John, what were you thinking? Well, first of all, I didn't tell any of those stories in my interviews. I was smarter than that. But I think it also just shows that God can work through anybody. And parents also, if you have a kid that just constantly makes you want to tear your hair out, just know it can get a little better. I'm still not perfect, but I'm better than the kid that shoved his brother out of a car. But you see, that biker, he was a good Samaritan. He saw someone in need, And he stopped. And yeah, I think most of us would stop if we saw a 4-year-old fall out of a moving car. That's kind of a no-brainer. But what about the moments that aren't as obvious? When the need isn't right in front of us? When we're too distracted or too exhausted? Or we've seen something so many times that we know is wrong, but we just have grown numb to it, so we continue walking. And that's what I want to talk about today, because when Jesus says go and do likewise, it's not just a closing line to this parable. It's a way of life, a way of participating in the kingdom of God here and now. It's a calling. This parable is a picture of the gospel in motion. And the invitation is not just to feel something, but to do something. Now, before we dive into the story of the Good Samaritan, I want to pause and reflect on something John said last week about West Michigan niceness. And you know what I mean? That kind of polite head nod, smile, and wave friendliness that's warm on the surface, but doesn't always go much deeper. Again, it's not that we're mean, it's just our relationship cards are already full. We have our rhythms, our routines, our people. And so we wave from the driveway, but very rarely do we go and sit at our neighbor's table. We walk past each other in the church lobby with a smile, but we rarely stop long enough to hear a real story before we grab our chips and head right out the door. And sometimes, without even realizing it, we stop making room for new relationships. And John reminded us that before we can truly love our neighbor, we have to actually know them. And he challenged us to do something pretty radical. Well, as an introvert, I at least thought it was really radical. And he challenged us to talk to someone new for 5 minutes each Sunday. I know, really, really scary. And again, that challenge hit me hard, not just because I'm shy, but because growing up, I thought I was pretty decent at the whole neighbor thing. However, after college, I moved to Tennessee and Arkansas, and something strange happened. I felt lost, and I realized I was terrible at being a good neighbor. You see, I was removed from my relational bubble that I grew up in, and suddenly I had no idea how to make new relationships from scratch. Most of my friendships kind of dated back to 4th grade, so making friends had never required intentionality. And now I was in a completely new environment, a new context, new culture, and it was humbling. I'd walk into church events or community events, and even though people were kind, I still felt invisible. Everyone was nice, but I didn't really feel known. I didn't feel invited in, and to be honest, it was completely my fault, because that muscle for making friends, I hadn't used it since I was in elementary school. And the truth is, adult friendships are really hard. There aren't a lot of organic spaces anymore where connection just happens. We used to kind of have neighborhood block parties or front porch conversations, regular dinner times with extended family and friends. Now a lot of us drive home, we open our garage, we shut the door, we go have dinner, and then we binge watch our favorite shows sitting next to the people we love, but not really engaging them. You see, making friends as a kid was easy. I've watched my daughter countless times on the playground. She'll run up to a random kid, she'll shout something that nobody understands, she'll smack them on the back really hard, and then boom, they're playing tag, instant friends. Like, it's easy. If you try that as an adult, unless the random person that you go up and smack on the back is John, you're probably gonna end up on the neighborhood watch list or something like that. But seriously, somewhere along the way, we stop knowing how to connect. Life has shifted, and those spaces that used to make it easier to connect just kind of disappeared. So how do we rebuild what's no longer naturally there? Because community isn't going to just come and knock on our doors. It takes effort. We have to be intentional. Building relationships is a very two-way street. It takes effort, vulnerability, time, and sometimes it takes one person being brave enough to make the first move. But let's be honest, that's really scary. We're afraid of awkwardness, afraid of being rejected, afraid of not having anything in common, and so there's those really weird moments of just awkward silence when nobody knows what to say. Those are the absolute worst. And so what do? We just wait. And guess what? The other person is probably waiting too. And so very quickly, we're just constantly quietly walking past each other, waiting, hoping that someone will take the risk. And friends, we can't live like this anymore. The U.S. Surgeon General recently declared loneliness a public health crisis. Studies show loneliness increases your risk for heart disease, anxiety, depression, and is as dangerous for you as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And spiritually, it's just as harmful. We were created for connection. God hardwired us for community. And yet so many of us sit in crowded rooms each week and feel completely alone. So how do we push back against this isolation? How do we create spaces where we break through the fear and awkwardness and actually start building relationships that matter? Like I said, I believe it starts with intentionality. We need to have the courage to stop walking past one another and start walking with each other. To slow down and turn towards the person next to you and ask a real question. To risk a little awkwardness for the chance at something deeper. Because community doesn't just happen, it's built one conversation, one shared meal, one vulnerable moment at a time. And I believe one of the most powerful places to start building that kind of connection is around the table. There's this beautiful story in Luke 24, the road to Emmaus. Two of Jesus' followers are walking along this road right after the resurrection. They're sad, they're hurting, they're mourning. And then some man comes up and joins them. And it's Jesus, their friend. And yet they don't recognize him at all. And then they just start walking down the road and they keep talking to one another. And Jesus launches into probably one of the greatest Bible stories that ever existed. And he explains the entire Bible from start to finish to them. And it says that they're amazed and they keep walking, they keep talking. And eventually they come towards the end of their journey. They come to the men's home. And the men invite their new friend to join them for dinner, to stay at their house before he continues his journey. And so they sit at the table and they break bread. And when they start eating together, their eyes are opened and they realize it's Jesus. You see, it wasn't the words that he said, it wasn't the teaching, it was the presence, it was the meal, it was the relationship that broke down the barrier. Because that's what meals do. They slow us down. They invite us to listen. They turn strangers into friends where we remember what it actually feels like to be seen, heard, and known. And there's a couple in our church who are leaning into this in a really beautiful way this summer. And they're creating spaces around their table so people in our community can actually see each other. Not just walk by, but sit down, share a story, have a meal, laugh, pray, and listen. And I want to invite them up here to share a little bit of their heart, their vision, and maybe challenge you to kind of do the same. Because we weren't made to walk past one another. We were made to stop, to see, to sit down, and say you belong here. So thank you so much for joining me up here. I know this is a little different. I don't think I've ever done a sermon an interview in the middle of a sermon before, but Derek had this idea and I was like, sure, we'll try it. So thanks for being creative, and I promise I won't gently push you off this stage when you're done. Okay.
Push me off the stage.
But if you guys just want to introduce yourself and maybe share what you're doing this summer and what your vision was.
My name is Derek, and this is Lori Nuberta. Together, we're the Nubertas. Our vision on doing dinner at our house is, I guess of what it looks like, is we want to invite 10 people over to our house, have a dinner, a big square table so we can all kind of sit around, be together, have a good conversation. Nothing too crazy fancy, just, no suit. Yeah, you don't have to wear a suit or anything like that. I was thinking about actually having Kurt come over and play a violin at the table, but he retired. But there's a sign-up sheet on the back. We have 3 different dates, and there's also a menu on there as well. And every dinner, every meal is different on all those dates. So if you want to look at those dates and see what works in your calendar to come over and have a nice dinner and get to know everybody. It's a good way, like what Pastor John mentioned last week, of filling out that white sheet that he had up there and turning it in, kind of a deal. So, don't have to. I don't think that was one of the requirements, but Yeah, that's kind of what the vision of like what we were thinking.
Awesome.
So if you can, look at the menu of the guys, people on the World Wide Web, take a look at it and see what's on the menu and the dates that aren't here today. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you maybe share kind of what the heart behind it, or how God kind of laid this on your heart, or how you felt called to do it?
You have a bigger heart.
I guess it goes back to when we were at our old church and coming out of COVID, and we went back to church and we were in person, and I just remember feeling very lonely and unseen within the church. Been there for 10 years, knew lots of people, but just had a desire for more connection. So I personally started hosting just dinners in our house for women of the church. Kind of did that with some moms from school as well over the years, and just felt truly blessed by it in the form of connection and just getting to know each other, that of those that you pass in the hallway or the back of church, and just could know a name and have some conversation and context and stuff like that. So fast forward, the last year I've just been really struggling with where God was calling me and feeling a nudge to do more at church, but not knowing where that worked. And then a few weeks ago when John said that so many of us feel unseen, and then Derek and I were chatting, and he's like, let's host dinners for men and women. So I was like, yes, like I feel that's something we can do together. We can get to know some more people from our church and just be blessed in that way. So then we talked to Josh, and who knew it would fit into this sermon series and we could be up here.
Awesome.
But,
Yeah,
yeah.
Thank you. And then Derek kind of mentioned it, but how can others get involved, or do you have any encouragement for someone who might be considering hosting themselves?
I would say if you're feeling the nudge to do something like this, they probably won't call you up front. You can just do it, not have to talk in front of us. But just do it. I remember after COVID, probably 6 months to a year, knowing that God was calling me to doing this, but I had every excuse in the book. We were going through a home remodel, so our home was not pretty, and, we can't do it then, or people won't come because they don't like me or know me or this or that. And when I think I put it aside that God was asking me to say yes to my nudging, and then he was going to work in the hearts of those that needed to come and follow and answer yes to those nudgings, it was just a beautiful thing. Like, you'll be truly blessed by it. The connections you make, the people you meet, those that show up, I didn't know any of them before they came, and now they're good friends that I still talk to and have gotten to know better, and it was just a blessing.
Well, again, thank you so much. Thank you for joining me. And as they're grabbing their seats, again, the signups are in the back there. So if you want to sign up for one of the meals, I looked at the menus. There's some really good ones. I think he has like steak and salmon on one of them. So that one might go pretty quick. But feel free to sign up in the back. And then also, if you're interested in hosting, there's also a sign up back there. And we'd love to connect with you and get you involved in that. But again, thank you so much for joining us. And I love how you shared you didn't know exactly what God was calling you to do, but you kind of just took the nudge and you went with it, and you trusted that you were going to give what you had, what you love doing, host people and have dinners, and you trusted that God would do something incredible with it. And I think that's kind of the heart of being a good neighbor. It's not about having the perfect plan or some giant platform. It's just about being willing to listen to the nudge and the calling. It's about being willing to kind of offer what's in your hands, your time, your gift, your passions, what you have fun doing, like cooking or hosting people, and trusting that God can multiply it and do something remarkable through it. And when I think of that kind of posture, I come back to the story of the feeding of the 5,000. You might have heard of this moment. Jesus has been teaching people for a while. There's thousands of people. There are 5,000 men, but then there's also women and children, so there's even more than 5,000 people. And he's been teaching, and the disciples start to notice that everybody's getting a little hungry. And they look around, and there's no food around here. What are we supposed to do? And so they go and ask Jesus a question. They're like, Jesus, how do you want us to feed all the people? And again, Jesus is not good at answering questions. And he just is like, you guys got to figure it out for yourselves. And so the disciples go into full panic mode. And I think they're probably feeling overwhelmed. Everybody in the crowd's probably feeling pretty hangry. And if you've ever met my wife when she's hangry, you know you don't want to be around people when they're hangry. And so it's a tense situation, and nobody really knows what to do. But then there's this little boy who looks down at what he has. He has 5 loaves and 2 fish. And he doesn't overthink it. He doesn't say, this isn't enough. He just gives it to Jesus and trusts that Jesus will do the rest. And that small act of generosity turned into a miracle. A crowd is fed, and this little boy becomes a good neighbor to 5,000 plus people who got to eat because of him. And it all started because, again, he didn't underestimate what he had to offer. So let me ask you, how can you get creative with your gifts and talents? What has God placed in your hands that could be a blessing for someone else? It doesn't have to be big. Just bless in the ways that you can and trust Jesus to do the rest. And so I know we've been on a little bit of a journey this morning. We started with the Good Samaritan, then we ended up at a police station, then we went to the road to Emmaus, then we had lunch with 5,000 people, and now we're going to get back to the Good Samaritan. And I think that's the beauty of it, though. You see, the Good Samaritan story was never meant to just be read. It was always meant to be imitated. And if you read closely, you start to see the Samaritan's heart echoed all throughout the Bible, in Jesus' life, in the early church, in kids with fish sandwiches, and hopefully in us. So what does it look like to live this out? What does it look like to truly be a good neighbor? And I believe the Samaritan shows us 3 simple but powerful actions. And to help you remember them, I want to bring you back to something from childhood. Does anybody remember the stop, drop, and roll, right? It was simple. It was easy to remember. It was clear. It was really easy to act on in a moment of crisis. And so this morning we have the Samaritan's version. Stop, listen, engage. And the first one is stop, because this is where it all begins. Because before you can actually love someone, you have to pause long enough to notice they exist. The Samaritan was traveling a road known for danger, a place where people were regularly ambushed and robbed. When he stops, he makes himself vulnerable to be attacked himself. It would have made much more sense for him to keep going. It would have been the safer thing to do. But when he saw the man bleeding on the side of the road, he didn't look away. He stopped. He risked his own safety. He disrupted his schedule, and he allowed his day to be inconvenienced by compassion. And if we're going to truly love like Jesus, we must be interruptible. We have to make peace with divine detours. We must be willing to step into uncomfortable situations and take risks, because that's what true love requires. That's what Jesus did. He left the comforts of heaven. He stepped into our mess. He risked everything. He risked rejection, betrayal, and even death, all to show us that he would always stop for us, that he desperately desires to be near us in any situation. And if Jesus was willing to stop for us, we also have to be willing to stop for others. But again, that's a real challenge. We live in a world that worships hustle, that celebrates full calendars, efficiency, and productivity. In that kind of world, stopping can often feel inefficient, irresponsible, or maybe just uncomfortable. But love doesn't move at the speed of our schedules. Love moves at the pace of presence. And sometimes the most Christ-like thing we can do is embrace the interruption. And I had one of those this week. I think sometimes when you're preaching about something, God really makes you lean into it. A former student called me this week and asked if I could pick him up from the airport in Chicago at 7 p.m. last night. And everything in me wanted to say no. I had a sermon to practice, a full day ahead, sleep I desperately didn't want to lose. But then I thought about this sermon and what it meant to stop, and I realized I couldn't just preach it or tell you guys to do it if I wasn't willing to do it in my own life. And so last night, I drove all the way to Chicago, and I got home really late. But honestly, that conversation and that ride with one of my students was one of the most meaningful parts of my week. To get to hear about his adventures in his study abroad, how college is going, and what he's looking forward to into the future, it meant a whole lot to me. And I realized that sometimes when God places an interruption in our life, it's not just for the sake of others, but it's also so that God can transform ourselves as well. He taught me how important it is to truly stop. And I hope I continue to live into that. So my question is, where can you stop this week? Now, the second one is listen. And I know the Samaritan didn't actually hear the guy because he was barely alive, but he saw him. And sometimes the most powerful kind of listening is simply slowing down enough to truly see somebody, to notice pain that others would walk right past, to see things from a different perspective or a different point of view, to pay attention to what's going on beneath the surface. In a world that's constantly distracted, listening has become a lost art. Most of the time, we're just waiting for our turn to talk, or we're half scrolling through our phones while someone's pouring out their heart, or we're unwilling to listen because someone has a different perspective than us, so we just turn them out. But the Samaritan didn't rush by. He looked, he lingered, he listened not with his ears, but with his eyes and his heart. And friends, there are people all around us, at work, in our neighborhoods, even here in this room, who may be silently wondering, does anyone really see me? To be a good neighbor means cultivating the spiritual discipline of presence. It means learning to listen not just with our ears, but with our hearts, our attention, and our time. Because that kind of listening rushes past assumptions. It slows the pace and it gives people the gift of being fully seen and known. And when we listen like that, we reflect the heart of Jesus. The Jesus who never rushed past pain, but always stopped to lean in. Now, the last step is engage. And this is where love moves from theory to action. You see, the Samaritan didn't just see the man. He didn't just stop. He engaged. Because you can notice someone, you can even pause for them. But if you never take the next step, nothing changes. Again, the Samaritan didn't just feel bad. He didn't say a quick prayer and just keep walking. He got involved. He bandaged the man's wounds. He took him to an inn. He paid for his care and promised to return. He didn't try to solve every problem or fix the whole system. He simply did what he could with what he had. And I think this is a step where many of us freeze. At least I freeze here. Because we're willing to stop. We're willing to listen. But when it comes to action, when it's actually going to cost us something, sometimes we get stuck. What if I don't know what to do? What if I mess it up? But here's the truth. I think if you've genuinely stopped, if you've genuinely listened, the Spirit will often make the next step clear. Maybe it's offering a ride or making a meal or sending a text that says, hey, I'm here. Watching somebody's kids for an hour or dropping off groceries. Again, it doesn't have to be dramatic. It just has to be faithful. Like the little boy with the 5 loaves and 2 fish. He didn't overthink it. He didn't say this is enough. He simply gave what he had and Jesus did the rest. The miracle was never in the size of the gift. It was in his willingness to offer it. So friends, may we be people who stop, who truly listen, and who have the courage to engage. May we give what we have, however small it may seem, and trust that God can do something extraordinary with it for the sake of our neighbors. And as we close, here's what I love about this story. Jesus didn't just tell it, he lived it. On his final journey to Jerusalem in the last days before he would carry the cross, Jesus was surrounded by noise, by urgency, by crowds shouting his name. And yet on that same road to Jerusalem that the Samaritan traveled, he saw a blind man, someone everyone else had walked past, someone people had dismissed, silenced, and ignored. But Jesus stopped, and he didn't assume what the man needed. He asked, he listened, and when the man said, I want to see, Jesus didn't hesitate. He engaged, he healed. Because even in his final moments, Jesus made the time to stop, to listen, to engage with someone everyone else thought wasn't worth it. So what about us? As we walk through this summer, as we go to work, as we grill in our backyards or take kids to soccer or baseball or the beach, how can we stop, listen, and engage? Who's the neighbor that God is putting in your path? The one the crowd might overlook. And I know it's easy to feel overwhelmed, to not really know where to start. We look around at the brokenness of the world and we wonder, what difference can I truly make? But I believe we can. And I believe it starts with loving one neighbor at a time. You see, there was this one morning, an old man was walking along a beach in the early morning. And as he was walking on the beach, he noticed hundreds of starfish that had been washed upon the shore. And he looked ahead and he saw this little boy doing something a little weird. This little boy kept bending over and throwing things back into the ocean. And so he approached the little boy to ask him what he was doing. And as he walked up, he noticed the little boy was picking up starfish and throwing them back in. And he comes up to him and he says, "What are you doing?" And the boy says, "I'm picking up the starfish because if they stay out in the sun, they'll die." And the man's response was, there's so many starfish. There's hundreds, there's possibly thousands of these. What difference can you make? And the little boy looked at the man with only the confidence, arrogance, and ego a child can have, bent over, picked up a starfish, threw it back into the ocean, and said, "I made a difference for that one." The old man then bent down, picked up a starfish, and together they started throwing them back into the ocean. Friends, this is the kind of church I believe we're called to be. Not a church that walks by, not a church that says the need is too great, but a church that sees, that stops, that listens, that engages. Whether it's an obvious moment like when a 4-year-old is pushed out of a car in a police station, or a quiet one like the coworker who always sits alone. May we be people who don't walk by. May we be the people who bend down, pick up a starfish, throw it back, and invite others to join us, believing that even small acts of love can ripple into something internal. Because when one person loves like Jesus, it makes a difference. But when a whole community starts to live like Jesus, that's how neighborhoods get radically transformed with the hope and love of Jesus Christ. That's how the kingdom of God breaks in. So may we go and be those kinds of neighbors this summer. Let's pray. Dear God, I thank you for the people that you've put in our lives. I pray that we wouldn't just hear the Good Samaritan, but it would be a story that we truly embody and live out. May we stop, listen, and engage. May we help the people that are unseen be seen, the people that are unheard be heard, and the people that are unknown be known. We love you, God, and we thank you for loving us. Amen.